It is actually quite surprising when you ponder a map of the region that the Eastern Mediterranean isn't more of a trouble spot. This is not to downplay or dismiss such tensions and frictions as do exist, merely to note that a cauldron hovered over by Greece, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Egypt and Libya seems somewhat liable to boil over. In the middle of it, of course, is Cyprus, split for a tick over half a century by a frozen front line. Unsurprisingly, the preservation of the uneasy peace of the Eastern Mediterranean is a regular preoccupation of the Delphi Economic Forum at which this episode was recorded. Greece is inevitably well represented at the event. Our interview with Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis at this year's forum can be heard in Foreign Desk number 590 a couple of weeks back. But the subject of Turkey, Greece's neighbour and eternal antagonist, comes up pretty frequently as well. The Eastern Mediterranean is also a gateway to the Middle East, an arena whose metaphorical sands have been shifting. As recently as last year's Delphi Economic Forum, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad looked like the immovable victor of his country's long war, Hezbollah appeared a dominant military and political force in Lebanon, and through both of those, Iran looked an unbudgeable influence on the region as a whole. For the Middle East's still stateless Kurds, the balance of threat and opportunity has tilted yet again. What does Turkey really want in the Eastern Mediterranean? Is Cyprus actually solvable? And do we yet understand how the Middle East is being reshaped? This is the Foreign Desk.
So, like any East Med, Turks, just aggression in the East Med or taking over Cyprus, or getting into it is just nonsense. Believe me, it doesn't make any sense.
We did the same mistake when it comes to our relations with Russia, where we became dependent on our energy supply, where we pretended not to see. And I think we are repeating the same mistake with Turkey. We are once again pretending not to see. For instance, that the leader of the opposition has been imprisoned.
You're listening to the Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Muller. Our first guest is Kubad Talabani, Deputy Prime Minister of the Kurdistan Regional Government in Iraq. The Kurdistan Regional Government is usually abbreviated to KRG, and those new to the region's three-letter acronyms, or if you will, TLAs, should note that the PUK referred to in this interview are Mr. Talabani's party, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, and that the KDP are their longtime rivals, the Kurdistan Democratic Party. I began by asking how close the PUK and the KDP were to forming a new government, nearly 6 months since October's KRG election.
We are close. We've done probably most of the hard work. We've been engaging our potential coalition partners on a vision document for how to govern Kurdistan. We wanted to apply a different methodology this time, rather than just talking about who governs Kurdistan and which ministries get passed out to people. Let's talk about actually the mechanisms of governance and how we make decisions in a coalition government and how we try to create a better sense of unity and partnership, which is really more important than who is which minister.
So you're trying to see beyond the sort of traditional just dividing stuff up between the PUK and the KDP so everybody gets enough that they're not terribly angry with the other bunch.
Exactly. There's no point giving ministries out if we don't agree on a mechanism for how these ministries actually work with each other and how we make strategic decisions collectively as a coalition government. And I think we've overcome those discussions, and now we're soon at the point where we will be talking about which ministries go to which party.
But are there any significant points of disagreement between the PUK and the KDP about what those mechanisms are going to be and how they're going to function?
Thankfully, no, because we've come together on a vision, a document that both sides have by and large agreed to. Maybe historically there have been different modus operandi for the parties. Maybe there's different ways that the parties make decisions, but I think we've been able to put our thoughts and our processes together and come up with a unified platform.
You use the phrase history to describe the relationship between the PUK and the KDP, which is obviously an absolutely hilarious understatement. But is it actually possible that the two parties / two families are now finding a different way to interact with each other?
Yes. I mean, look, we both want to do the best for the country, for the region, for our voters. Now, we had an excellent election with massive turnout, so there is greater expectation than ever before that the government must function more effectively than all of the other governments before it. This is also not happening in a vacuum. It's happening at a time of regional change, of conflict, of a little bit of instability regionally, and a little bit of, so to speak, anticipation as to what could happen, what's happening in Syria, what could happen between America and the region, what's happening in Gaza. These things are all relevant to the psyche of Iraqis, including those in Kurdistan.
All of which I will come back to, but one final question on domestic matters. Is it at all fair to suggest that both the main establishment Kurdish parties were a bit spooked by the 15% of the vote that New Generation got? Does that suggest that there might be a growing impatience with the ongoing PUK, KDP, Talabani-Barzani family feud?
It's unfair. It's not a family feud. We have two parties that have institutions, they have organizations, they have different policies, they have histories that have been positive and negative. And since 2009, there has been a very large base, the voter base, that has voted for another party. We had the Change movement that actually beat the PUK in elections in 2009 and 2013. So having an opposition vote is not new for Kurdistan, and it's certainly not new for a city like Slemania that has a lot of political freedoms that allows people to express their disapproval. And so I think it's healthy to have this pressure. It's healthy to get into a state of being complacent. I think we saw it. We saw the PUK vote increase, and the UK's share of the overall vote increase significantly, and our gap between the PUK and the New Generation increased also. So I think there is, while we're happy that there is in general an opposition movement, I think people realize that power needs to be in the hands of those who have the largest base in Kurdistan, and that's the KDP and PUK.
You referred to events in the wider region. Have those events, especially those in Syria, changed the political dynamics within the KRG at all? Do you have to think differently about how you govern domestically, given that, well, it's hard to say whether the wider region is more or less stable than it was 2 or 3 years ago? Not
directly, but again, it's a reminder that we're living in a really volatile region, right? And Syria has changed significantly in the last 6 months or so, and it could change again. So we're obviously concerned for the Kurdish community in Syria. We're concerned for Syria as a whole. We'd like Syria to be a stable country on our border. It could be a potential trading partner for Kurdistan. There's a lot of connections, obviously, given the joint fight against terrorism. So we do not want Syria to become a bastion for terrorist organizations that could then hurt us in Iraqi Kurdistan or Iraq proper. So it is connected. We are concerned, but it's not changing the way we're doing anything now.
Yeah, I mean, is it clear to you whether Kurds in Syria are any more or less safe now than they were under Assad? We have seen in recent weeks the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are largely Kurdish militias, despite the name being theoretically at least absorbed into Syrian state structures. Is that good news or bad news as you see it?
Well, under Assad, Kurds didn't even have citizenship.
True enough.
So now, obviously, they're citizens of a country, so automatically there's a bit of progress there. Now, when it comes to political participation and how do you incorporate the Kurdish forces that have fought valiantly against terrorism in Syria, that have been really on the front lines in the war against ISIS, the men and women of the Syrian Democratic Forces made the world proud in their fight. So that needs to be respected. the efforts to incorporate them into the state security apparatus is something that the country needs if we want Syria to be a healthy, functioning, institutional country that goes beyond the Assad-style rule or another rule that would be detrimental to the future of Syria.
What's your level of confidence, though, that that is going to be allowed to happen, or that Syria and Syrians will be allowed to figure this out for themselves?
Well, there is a lot of countries involved in Syria right now. I don't think Syrians will be left alone to work out their differences. I think everyone's going to try to influence the future of Syria one way or another. Western powers, Eastern powers, neighboring powers, and internal powers. Ultimately, Syria is a multi-ethnic, multi-sectarian country whose future administration needs to reflect that diverse makeup of the country.
And how nervous do you get at the prospect of President Donald Trump trying to force/impose/construct some sort of settlement with Iran? I'm asking you to turn around and face in the other direction at this point.
I think a deal between the United States and Iran is good for the United States, it's good for Iran, it's good for Iraq, it's good for Kurdistan.
You're not at all concerned, given the record of the United States in sort of over the last 20 years or so in trying to fix the broader Middle East, that this may cause more problems than it solves?
Dialogue should never cause problems. And if there's a talk that's going on, a direct talk between the United States and Iran, that's parties that have disputes need to talk them out. And that's progress. So we're very happy that there are talks, and we hope that the talks lead to a deal.
To return to where we came in, the question of domestic politics, and I know it's the big question of Kurdish domestic politics. The idea of Kurdish independence, is that definitely off the agenda for the foreseeable?
We are trying to focus on our development as a functioning constitutional region within federal Iraq. I think the people of Kurdistan made their voice very clear during the referendum, but countries around the world also made their opinions very clear on our referendum. So I think we've moved on from that, and our priority has to be doing what's best for our public, which is services, jobs, improve the economy, improve the infrastructure, improve the education levels, improve the livelihoods, eliminate illegal migration, fight terrorism, and live happily and healthily.
But given, as we have seen in the last 18 months especially, the propensity of the Middle East to change dramatically, quickly and unpredictably, is there still a vague hope that events might break in that direction at some point?
I've always believed that Kurdistan's independence should not come at the expense of Iraq.
What does that mean?
It means if Kurdistan is independent, it should come out of a deal between Iraq and Kurdistan.
That was Kubad Talabani, Deputy Prime Minister of the Kurdistan Regional Government. This is The Foreign Desk. You're listening to The Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Muller. The rest of this show was recorded at our improvised pop-up studio on one of the terraces of the forum's venue, the Amalia Hotel in Delphi. Our next guest is Defne Arslan, Senior Director of Turkey Programs at the Atlantic Council. I began by asking what it was like coming to Greece, of all places, as a Turkey specialist.
I have been here before, and it is great actually. It is no different from you guys coming from London or any other part of the world. It's a great thing. I always chat with my Greek friends. We are very much similar than any other nation. Actually, one of my Greek friends told me that normally, there's a belief that Greeks and Italians are similar to each other. Actually, on the other hand, I think Greeks and Turks are very similar to each other. And we have the same culture. Greece was a part of Ottoman for 300 years. Happy time for Ottomans, but not happy time for Greece, I understand. But still, there has been such a lot of cultural influence both ways, either from Turks to Greece or vice versa, Greeks to Turks, including Turkish coffee, Greek yogurt, Turkish yogurt, and Turkish baklava, Greek baklava. I mean, you name, there are plenty. I mean, it's a long list. And how can you divide two nations? They like the same things, they think the same way, they think alike, and literally they feel the same way and they react the same way. And to many things, just emotionally, that's what I mean. So, and I had my master's in UK, and my best friends were from Greece. And I remember I had an accident, and I can never forget the help that I received from them. So,
I mean, as your answer, though, does reflect, there is an amount of history in the relationship between Greece and Turkey. Right now, though, measured against that history, how would you assess the state of the relationship?
Of course, there's a lot of emotion on both sides about that, and there's always two sides of the story, okay? In any relationship, there is not any side who is 100% right or wrong, as in the relationship with Greece and Turkey, okay? And so, of course, Ottoman was a dominant power, and I'm not a historian, but I know well enough, being as a Turk originally, and also having a lot of, just connections in Greece through my friends here. And so there's a lot of history, there's a lot of emotion there, and I also, whenever I go to the conferences, it is amazing how much Greeks or Cypriots talk about Turks. But when you go to any Turkey conference, they don't talk about Greece. Okay, so I think this is kind of what's setting the relationship.
This is the common dynamic between big countries and small countries, though.
No, I don't want to call Greece or Cyprus a small country, but
they're smaller than Turkey.
Because of the Ottoman Empire time and the dominance in the region. That's put in that way, okay?
To ask the same question from a slightly different direction, do you think there is any more or less than usual nervousness from Greece and Cyprus about Turkey's ambitions or Turkey's interests in the Eastern Mediterranean?
There are, but it is not realistic. I think it is coming from the history and also domestic politics, mostly. Like any government in Turkey using some nationalist motives, for domestic political purposes. I think in Greece or Cyprus, it is Turkey, okay? So, like any East Med Turks, just aggression in the East Med or taking over Cyprus or getting into, it is just nonsense, believe me. It doesn't make any sense, and actually Turkey will never do such a thing. Turkey has, I think, matured in international relationship as a responsible NATO ally. And bottom line is that as a NATO ally, they will not be, doing this, okay? First of all, they have responsibility as part of NATO. So any kind of nervousness about Turkish aggression doesn't have much basis, okay? It is just...
None at all. I mean, it's not like President Erdogan lacks any sense of sort of bygone imperial grandeur, and it's not like he has no record of making impulsive maneuvers.
I know President Erdogan uses this in his remarks and as a rhetoric, but I truly believe that it is all for his domestic political audience. And I never adopted that he actually meant it, so... But, he can't. But still, like Greeks say things about Turkey in politics or Cyprus does, he has to do the same, okay? I think for political purposes, that's how it should be perceived in general.
That was Defne Arslan, Senior Director of Turkey Programs at the Atlantic Council. This is the Foreign Desk. This is the Foreign Desk on Monocle Radio. Our next guest is Haris Georgiades, former Finance Minister of Cyprus, now Chair of the Foreign and European Affairs Committee of the Cypriot Parliament. Earlier this year, an attempt was made by the United Nations to kickstart talks on Cyprus in Geneva, attended by representatives from both sides of the divided island. I began by asking Haris Georgiades whether anybody had suggested any solution which had not already been suggested in the preceding 50 years or so.
No, and that's one of the problems. So, big picture approach. Turkey accomplished a military fait accompli 50 years ago. I do not think Turkey is really ready to remove its military presence from the island. Definitely not today. when it is actually adopting a very ambitious, probably a revisionist stance in the whole region. So Turkey sees itself not as just another partner in the Eastern Mediterranean, but as the dominant power. See how it is clashing with Israel over the, let's say, dominance in the East Med. So I cannot see how, simply by just sitting down and negotiating, once again, Turkey will move from this position. So why is it even bothering to go through this process? I think because Turkey needs a couple of things from Europe and the West. It needs an upgrade to its customs union. It needs participation in the new European security architecture, and it doesn't really want Greece and Cyprus to be real obstacles. So adopting a rather more conciliatory stance and showing up for yet another round of talks is probably a good approach on the part of Turkey to ensure that it gets what it wants from what is now a transactional relationship between Turkey and the European Union. So as much I would have liked to be more optimistic, I do not see Turkey bulging on the core issue of its military presence in the island, which is an absolute prerequisite for any form of negotiated settlement.
Do you think that's what Turkey sees as the value in northern Cyprus now, that it gives it leverage against the European Union and I guess stops a rival power bloc forming in the Mediterranean between Greece and Cyprus?
Yes, I mean in international politics, especially when it comes to security, perceptions matter, and in the Turkish mindset there is a risk of encirclement from the west and from the south, from this Greece, Cyprus, Israel axis. I think this is not a valid concern, but still, this is the perception. Turkey does not want to feel that it is being encircled. Actually, it wants to project its power, including its military power, well beyond its borders. This is the doctrine of the blue homeland, which basically sees a much more ambitious role for this pivotal country. And yes, Cyprus is right in the middle of it. So we are obviously not going to move. We are stuck with this neighbor, but we have to find maybe a different path, first of all, to maintain peace, but even to find solutions. The EU-Turkey relationship will be key in this dimension, and this is exactly what's missing.
I mean, the way you've described Turkey there is quite evocative of another large and grumpy power to Europe's east. What have you made of suggestions that Cyprus could be perhaps some sort of a model for a future settlement in Ukraine, that you sort of like maybe temporarily agree to let some of it go in the interests of a quiet life?
Well, this would not be very promising for the rules-based international order, which we know it was not perfect, but it was quite significant in maintaining peace over the last decades. So if Cyprus is now becoming an example of a strong state, militarily attacking its neighbor and keeping what it grabbed, and this is repeated in Ukraine, I don't think this is a positive message. This is not what the European Union and the West should be, let's say, emphasizing at these times. So that's why I am advocating for a much more credible, well-thought Turkey policy on behalf of the EU and the West. We did the same mistake when it comes to our relations with Russia, where we became dependent on our energy supply, where we pretended not to see. And I think we are repeating the same mistake with Turkey. We are once again pretending not to see. For instance, that the leader of the opposition has been imprisoned. There has been silence across Europe about this event. And it is equally a convenient way to say to the Cypriots, well, try to talk again, and presumably it's enough, let's say, to deal with Turkey and the Cyprus problem. No, it's not enough. That's why I say a much more credible, well-thought Turkey policy, as we should have had with Russia. Let's not repeat the same mistake.
I mean, I know you know the difference there, or a difference there is that Turkey is the second biggest military in NATO, which makes taking a robust line against it a little more complicated. But that notwithstanding, that sort of more credible, well-thought-out policy towards Turkey you're talking about, what would that actually look like? Or what would an example of that be that we're not doing that we should be doing?
Okay, let's take the Turkey wants an upgraded customs union. No objection. But could we possibly accept that on Turkey's part, this customs union would apply to 27 and not to 26, and not to 27 member states? So it's not even an issue of exerting pressure. A customs union should be on offer to Turkey, but this should include the entire European Union. It's not
By
for
which you mean Cyprus as well.
Exactly. Take the participation of Turkey with the second largest army in the West in the new European security architecture. Once again, no problem, no objection. But is it not common European self-interest to demand and expect that this should come in hand with Turkey accepting that it cannot challenge the sovereignty of its neighbors and in fact do so with the projection of military force? So it's not even an issue of exerting pressure or taking a tough line against Turkey. It's an issue of applying the self-evident common sense approach when it comes to EU-Turkey relations, and this would be enough, I believe, in, let's say, conveying the right message and shifting Turkey to a more agreeable stance.
That was Haris Georgiades, member of Cyprus's parliament and chair of its Foreign and European Affairs Committee. That's it for this episode of The Foreign Desk. We'll be back next week, and look out for The Foreign Desk Explainer, available every Wednesday. The Foreign Desk was produced by Anita Riota and Lily Austin, with editing assistance from Jack Dewars. Lily also produces The Foreign Desk Explainer. To contact the Foreign Desk team, you can email Anita at aer@monocle.com, and don't forget to subscribe to Monocle magazine and our free daily email bulletins by heading to our website at monocle.com. From me, Andrew Mullett, thanks very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.